What can you say about St. Francis in 25 minutes? You laugh. This is why in a lot of our friaries, they invite a Dominican over to preach on the Feast of St. Francis, and a Franciscan goes over for the Feast of St. Dominic. Well, let me just give some basic ideas. Francis was a man of his era, and like any young person, he wanted to succeed. But success is very often culturally defined. Success in a football family is different than in a family of academics, is different in a family of artists. What was success for Francis? Especially two things. One, to be the life of the party. He was a young man. He was known for carousing around the town. Assisi's not really a city, it's more a big town. And he was just the great guy to have whenever he threw a party. The second thing, military success. This was the time of the Crusades. It was a time of great battles. And having a rich father, his father was a successful cloth merchant, he bought the best of armor and he went off to battle. The problem was it didn't work. That because of a number of incidents, Francis was faced with a crisis. And what were those incidents? Well, one that his first battle he went out, he got captured. He was in prison for a few months, and then when he got back, he was suffering either from some sort of fever or depression or both. Another time he went out, gets to the first night stop, and he has a dream. And Jesus is there saying, who do you want to serve? The servant, implying the emperor, or the master? So he goes back home. Another time he's praying in a small abandoned chapel, and he sees that cross speak to him. Rebuild my church. Now he took it quite literally at first, but he slowly came to understand. And then the great moment that he himself always talked about, the day he met a leper. And we have to realize how afraid people were of lepers in those days. They were terrified. And he loathed the very idea of coming near a leper. But that day he saw that leper as a brother or a sister of Christ, and he kissed the leper. Those were great conversion moments in which Francis realized that success wasn't being the life of the party, wasn't being a great warrior. It was following in the footsteps of Christ. But even in that, he gave us a whole new definition of what that meant. You see, for a lot of people before his time, following in the footsteps of Christ meant abandoning the world, going out to the desert, going out to a monastery, and separating yourself from this world, because this world was evil, it was corrupt. The only way we can be saints is by rejecting it and living a totally spiritual reality. That's not what Francis saw. Francis inverted it and said, wait a minute, the only way we can really be saints is in our everyday life, in this world in which God placed us. The difference between these two is the difference between the Eastern theology, which says that we have to be divinized, we have to be made more like God, as opposed to the incarnation. We have to be humanized. God himself became human. We can only be saints by being truly human. Or to use a biblical example, remember on Good Friday when Jesus died on the cross, the veil of the temple split down the middle. What's the meaning? Well, first of all, that veil separated the Holy of Holies from regular life. So the holiness of God was shut out, separate. When the veil split, it meant two things. Number one, we could enter the heavenly Jerusalem. We could live as if we were divinized. Or two, the veil split and the holiness of God came crashing out into the world. And that's what Francis realized, the second one, that everything around him was holy, and therefore it had to be treated as holy. Every flower, every bird, every wolf was sent by God as a gift, and it had to be treated that way. Now, it wasn't easy for Francis because he was a man of his era. And so even though in theory he believed that, he didn't always practice it. He performed many, many severe penances upon his body, throwing himself into thorns when he was tempted and rolling in snow, all sorts of, what we would consider exaggerated things, to the point where towards the end of his life, he apologized to his body for the way he treated it or mistreated it. He thought, even though he said something else, he thought that he had to be totally spiritual to be a saint. And that might be why he always had a special devotion to the angels. Always loved the angels. In fact, the scene you see above us, where Francis receives the stigmata, he was up on that mountain to have a Lent, 40 days of prayer, before the feast of St. Michael, the archangel. Why does he like angels so much? Because they were the image that he applied to himself. I have to be totally spiritual to be a saint. But on that mountain, he learned something different. He received the wounds of Christ. And all of a sudden he realizes, this is where I become the image of Christ. In my own body, my body which is a gift, with its strengths and even its weaknesses. Conversion is not destroying what's here, it's transforming it. What do I mean? Well, Francis, remember he wanted to be the life of the party? So what did he do when he preached in a strange town? If the people got distracted, he'd start dancing around. Probably a first example of a liturgical dance we have. And he played the fool because he knew how to make people laugh, how to joke, all for the sake of the kingdom. You see it in St. Peter. St. Peter has to be the most impetuous person in the world. He sees Jesus on the seashore, doesn't recognize him yet. The beloved disciple says it's the Lord. And what does Peter do? Throws on his clothes and jumps in the water. Peter, when you're jumping in the water, you take your clothes off. He doesn't think, he just jumps. Thank goodness. Because if Peter hadn't been impetuous, what would he have done on Pentecost Sunday? He would have founded the evangelization committee. And they'd still be meeting and collecting funds. He had to march out and preach to convert 5,000 people on the spot. And even our favorite St. Thomas, Doubting Thomas. I never thought it was fair to call him Doubting Thomas. It's like the kid in kindergarten passes gas once, and he's stinky for the next 18 years. Even Thomas's doubts brought him to a deeper faith. In fact, in all the Gospels, he makes the highest proclamation of who Jesus is, my Lord and my God. And so it's in this body that we will become saints. Not in some never, never land where we'll never arrive, but with our strengths and even our weaknesses. Maybe that's something we could reflect on. How I can use my weaknesses in order to serve God. A simple example, I'm an adult child of an alcoholic, so a lot of times I have to be sort of told that I'm doing a good job. And if 50 of you said, Father, while you spoke, I saw an image of the Blessed Virgin Mary, I received the stigmata, and I levitated. And one person says it was 10 seconds too long. What do I meditate on for the next 6 weeks? That one person. It's so bad, I was giving a retreat to sisters, and one sister is in the front and agreeing with everything I said. I was so built up by that until I found out she had Parkinson's. But that weakness can also serve as a gift to recognize what other people with low self-esteem are going through, to empathize with them, and to help build them up. Even the things we least like about ourselves, maybe if we transform them, they become sources of grace. Because the goal is like the goal of Francis, to become a sacrament of the Passion of Christ. Remember the definition of sacrament? Visible sign of invisible grace. When you see his body, the stigmatized body, you think of the cross. Wouldn't it be great if when people saw us, they would say he is a real sacrament of the Passion of Christ. And when I say that, I mean passion in both of its meanings. Passion, incredible love. That we're people who are in love with God. That when we leave this chapel this afternoon, there's going to be a silly grin on our face. And people will ask us, what happened? You look so happy. Sacrament of that passion, but also sacrament of the suffering of Christ. Because we all have suffering in our life. We can put up with it, we can try to get through it, or we can transform it into love. Realizing that we don't know why God has given us this cross to carry. But it's not a curse, it's not a punishment. He's trusting us with the cross that he gave his own son. And like with his own son, someday we too will hear from the heavens, You are my beloved child, my chosen one. And may God bless us.